The maid whispered, "Your wife lied." The billionaire froze in front of everyone. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, scattering light across polished marble floors and gilded mirrors. The mansion pulsed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the low murmur of negotiations disguised as pleasantries. A senator leaned in toward a banker, their heads bowed close over champagne, while a film producer gestured extravagantly to a crowd hanging on his every word. Musicians played softly from the corner, their violins almost drowned out by the chatter. Amid the swirl of silk gowns and sharp suits, she moved unnoticed. The young black maid carried a silver tray, weaving between clusters of power and wealth as though she were invisible. Her crisp uniform and steady hands made her part of the furniture, present but unseen. She placed a fresh glass into the hand of a laughing executive without him so much as glancing up. She bent to clear plates from a gilded table, her movements smooth, efficient, rehearsed. Yet though her body moved on autopilot, her ears caught every word. She had long since learned the art of listening without looking like she was. Snatches of conversation flowed into her as naturally as the air she breathed. Investors fretting over contracts, politicians whispering about rivalries, a wife masking venom with laughter as she spoke of her husband's latest deal. Each fragment slid into her memory like another piece of a puzzle she had never been asked to solve. From her low vantage point, she saw more than the guests would ever admit. The tightness in a jaw when an old deal was mentioned, the flick of eyes toward a rival, the way the billionaire's wife smiled just a little too brightly, as if hiding cracks behind the glow. She had worked in the house long enough to sense that beneath the glitter, secrets burned hotter than the chandelier lights above. The billionaire himself stood at the center of it all, tall, immaculately tailored, his glass raised as people leaned in toward him like sunflowers straining toward light. He was practiced in charm, his voice smooth, his laughter perfectly timed. Yet the maid noticed when his gaze flicked once toward the staircase where his wife had disappeared, his expression tightening for just a heartbeat before the mask returned. No one else caught it, but she did. Balancing her tray, she slipped past a group of guests arguing softly about stocks, and her ears sharpened at a name dropped like an afterthought. It was spoken too quickly, but not quickly enough. Her pulse quickened. She knew the name. She had heard it earlier that week in the kitchen when the wife had taken a phone call, thinking no one was listening. The tone of her voice had been sharp then, hushed, threaded with tension. Now it surfaced again, woven into laughter, dressed up as business. She lowered her eyes, pretending to focus on the crystal glassware gleaming under the lights, but inside, her mind raced. Every word she overheard tonight was another thread, and already they were starting to weave together into something larger. Something dangerous. In that glittering room, filled with wealth and power, the maid's silence was her shield. But silence did not mean ignorance. And tonight, more than ever, she knew that the words no one meant for her to hear might change everything. The evening shimmered with wealth, but beneath the polished veneer, the maid sensed a current no chandelier could hide. She had grown used to watching without being seen, reading the room while refilling glasses or straightening plates. And tonight, her eyes caught on the billionaire's wife, again and again. The woman was dazzling, draped in a gown that glimmered like poured champagne, every jewel around her neck glittering under the lights. She laughed when people expected it, placed a graceful hand on an arm when conversation demanded warmth. Yet the maid noticed the way her smile faltered the moment attention drifted. When she thought no one was watching, her eyes hardened, her mouth tightened into a line too sharp for charm. Rumors slipped through the air like perfume. A whispered comment as the maid bent near a group of women in silk shawls. "She was seen last week at the hotel." Another hushed voice, feigned surprise and quick laughter. "Not with him, surely?" They giggled, raising their glasses, but their gazes darted toward the wife. The maid lowered her head, keeping her silence, but each word etched itself into her mind. The billionaire himself played the role of host with perfection, but even from across the room, she saw the stiffness in his posture when his wife drew near. They exchanged few words, but when they did, their voices dipped low and sharp. She once caught the flash of his hand, gripping her wrist tighter than a husband should in public, though his face never lost its mask of civility. The wife, for her part, responded with a smile so polished it looked almost painful. Servants moved in and out like shadows, and the maid kept her tray balanced, her expression neutral. But she saw what others missed, the flicker in the wife's gaze as it lingered on another man too long, the way the billionaire's jaw clenched when he noticed. It was a dance of appearances, one step from breaking, and every guest seemed to sense it. Near the grand staircase, the couple exchanged a few words too quietly for most to hear, but the maid, collecting glasses just behind a cluster of chairs, caught the edges. "Not here," the wife hissed under her breath, her smile plastered firmly in place for the benefit of a passing politician. The billionaire's reply was low, cold, and final. Then later, the tray trembled faintly in the maid's hands before she steadied it. She knew better than to look too long, better than to reveal she had heard. Still, the tension pressed against her like a weight, making her feel smaller, more invisible, even as her mind sharpened. The house was full of grandeur, the party a picture of wealth. But to her trained eyes, the glitter only made the cracks more glaring. Something was breaking inside that marriage, and though no one would dare speak it aloud, the silence around it was louder than the music. She walked on, unseen, yet she carried their secret with her like another glass balanced on her tray, fragile and certain to shatter. The music from the ballroom drifted faintly down the hallway, muffled by heavy doors and carpets, but the maid heard something else. She had gone to deliver a fresh tray of glasses, moving quietly as always when she turned the corner and froze. There, near a half-open doorway, the billionaire's wife stood with a guest, whose face she recognized a man from the finance world, slick and calculating, often seen whispering in corners rather than raising toasts. Their voices were low, but the maid had learned long ago how to listen between words. She paused, adjusting the tray in her hands as though balancing it required all her focus, yet her ears caught the fragments that slipped past the music. "He doesn't know," the wife hissed, her hand brushing the man's arm in emphasis. "Not yet, and it has to stay that way until after the deal." The man gave a sharp laugh, hushed but edged. "You're playing with fire. If he finds out, everything collapses." The wife's reply was colder, steadier. "I'll make sure he doesn't." The maid's chest tightened. She wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to hear this, yet her feet refused to move. The tray grew heavier in her hands as her mind tried to piece the meaning together. A deal, a secret kept from the billionaire, and a wife willing to conspire with someone who clearly had his own stake in whatever game was unfolding. The man leaned closer, and though the maid couldn't catch every word, she heard enough. "It's signed. If he thinks he owns it, let him. By the time he realizes, it'll be too late." The wife's laughter, soft and brittle, slipped into the silence of the corridor. Exactly. The sound chilled the maid more than any argument she had heard that night. This wasn't the cold tension of a marriage strained by pride. This was something else, betrayal. Carefully woven, hidden beneath diamonds and champagne. The maid's eyes flickered toward the grand mirror across the hall. From her angle, she saw their reflections in its polished surface. The wife's posture, elegant but sharp, her smile too measured, the man leaning in with the hunger of someone who smelled power. It struck her then that this was no fleeting whisper, no idle rumor. It was deliberate, calculated, and the man's words confirmed it. "When it breaks, you'll be free, and richer than him." The maid shifted her weight, the tray threatening to rattle. She caught it just in time, heart pounding. If they noticed her, if they suspected she had heard, the consequences would be severe. But if she said nothing, she carried the weight of what she knew alone. The wife ended the exchange with a glance toward the ballroom. "Go back first. I'll follow." The man nodded, slipping away into the glittering light. For a moment, the wife lingered, adjusting her gown, smoothing her expression back into the flawless mask she wore for society. Then she swept into the ballroom, laughter already on her lips, as though nothing had happened. The maid remained in the hall, rooted, her breath caught in her throat. The tray in her hands felt less like service and more like a shield. She had stumbled upon something dangerous, a truth too sharp to keep safely hidden, and though no one else saw, she knew the night had just shifted, And silence was no longer simple obedience. It was a burden that could break her. Her hands did not shake, though inside she felt as though she had been struck by a weight too heavy to carry. She moved through the ballroom with her tray as if nothing had happened, smiling politely, bowing her head when eyes glanced her way, but her ears heard nothing of the music anymore. Every sound was muffled under the echo of what she had overheard in the hallway. The words pressed against her like a secret too sharp to keep pressed against the skin. At the table, she poured champagne with steady fingers, careful not to spill, yet her mind replayed the wife's voice, low and cutting, promising to keep the truth hidden until it was too late. The man's laughter, slick with greed, clung to her memory like smoke. She told herself to let it go, to keep her place, to protect the small corner of safety she had managed in this mansion. She was only the maid, and the lives of billionaires were far above her reach. But the knowledge had lodged in her chest, heavy as stone. She thought of her wages, how fragile they were against the cost of living. She thought of her family who depended on her, of the endless hours she worked to keep food on the table. One wrong step, one misplaced word, and it could all vanish. She had been taught to survive by staying silent, to endure insults, whispers, and looks without flinching. And yet this was no small cruelty, no casual slight. This was something larger, a betrayal meant to fracture lives and fortunes. To know it and do nothing felt like carrying poison. Every time she caught sight of the billionaire's wife across the room, radiant in her gown, smiling as if nothing in the world could shake her, the maid's heart tightened. The wife laughed easily, placed her hand on her husband's arm as though nothing had happened in the shadows, as though her loyalty were unshakable. And the billionaire himself, shaking hands with powerful men, utterly unaware, seemed to shine with the confidence of someone who believed the ground under him was solid. Only she knew it wasn't. When she carried empty glasses back through the service corridor, her step slowed. She pressed her back against the wall, eyes shut for a moment, breathing hard. She could tell no one among the staff their loyalty was as much to their survival as hers, and whispering to them would only invite suspicion. She could not confront the wife. Such a move would destroy her instantly. And speaking to the billionaire himself seemed unthinkable, yet the thought pulsed through her veins. If no one else would tell him, who would? Her reflection in the darkened window startled her. She looked like herself, apron neat, hair pinned, expression tired. But beneath the uniform, she felt changed, as though fate had pressed something dangerous into her hands. She returned to her duties, but each polite gesture felt hollow, her smile a mask. The secret gnawed at her. Silence had always been her shield, but now it threatened to become her undoing. By the time the night drew on, her chest ached with the weight of her decision. To speak meant risk, perhaps even ruin, but to remain silent meant complicity. As she poured one last glass for a guest who barely looked at her, she realized that the burden of truth was already shaping her path. Whether she wanted it or not, she was now caught in a story that could no longer stay hidden. Crystal light spilled from chandeliers as the billionaire lifted his glass high, his voice carrying easily over the hush of the crowd. He spoke with polished charm, his words steady, practiced, brimming with pride. He thanked the guests for their presence, praised the grandeur of the evening, and then turned his attention toward the woman at his side. The wife's smile was dazzling, her diamonds scattering light like stars, her hand resting lightly on his arm as though she were the perfect image of loyalty. Applause swelled at the close of his toast, the sound smooth and unified, but beneath the polite noise, tension coiled like a snake. The maid moved among the guests, the silver tray steady on her arm, but her hands trembled faintly each time she leaned forward to pour wine. She kept her eyes down, fixed on the crystal glasses, afraid the fury and dread in her chest would show if she looked up. The wife laughed, her voice sweet as silk, her gestures fluid, but the maid could still hear the hidden words she had overheard hours before, whispered in a shadowed hallway. Every moment of this performance made her stomach twist tighter. She thought of slipping away, of leaving her tray in the kitchen and escaping before her thoughts betrayed her, yet she lingered, each pour of red wine drawing her deeper into the storm she could no longer avoid. Her pulse hammered louder than the music. She told herself to remain silent, to do as she always had, to endure, but something had shifted. The truth sat in her chest, like burning coal. And with each second, it scorched hotter. The billionaire's toast came to its final flourish, his voice strong and proud, as he declared his wife not only his partner in wealth and society, but the heart of his home. The crowd cheered, lifting their glasses, and all eyes turned toward the woman beside him. She accepted the praise with a graceful nod, a picture of elegance, her smile unwavering. The applause echoed against the marble walls, masking the quiet creak of the maid's tray as it shifted in her unsteady grip. Her heart whispered warnings. Stay quiet, survive, vanish into the background. Yet another voice pressed harder, firmer, a voice that remembered what she had heard, the betrayal cloaked in charm. The weight of silence felt heavier than the risk of speech. She looked up at last, her gaze locking not on the husband, but on the wife. For a fleeting moment, the maid thought she saw a flicker of unease pass across the woman's perfect expression, a glance so quick that no one else would have noticed. But it was enough. Her resolve hardened. The applause was still fading, the guests lowering their glasses, the room filled with warmth and admiration, but within that warmth, she felt the chill of dishonesty. She could not pretend any longer, not when the truth pressed against her ribs like a blade. With her pulse steadying, she tightened her grip on the tray, each step she took carrying her closer to a moment she knew could not be undone. The night had been meant to shine with the billionaire's pride. Instead, it had brought her to the breaking point. The applause faded into the high ceilings, leaving only the echo of clinking glasses. The billionaire lowered his drink, still smiling for the crowd, when the maid glided closer with the quiet grace of someone who was always meant to be unseen. Her tray balanced easily on one hand, her steps soft, deliberate, timed with the shifting bodies of the guests. To anyone watching, it looked like she was simply clearing a plate, leaning in to tidy the edge of the long banquet table. But beneath her calm, her heart was a drum, steady and unyielding. She bent slightly, her face close to his shoulder, and in that sliver of space where no one else could hear, she let 4 words slip past her lips. Your wife lied. The words were barely more than breath, but they cut sharper than glass. The billionaire froze mid-motion, the glass hovering at his mouth, his smile faltering just enough for those closest to notice. His eyes widened a fraction, then narrowed, his knuckles tightening around the stem of the wine glass. It was a reaction no charm could disguise. The ripple of change moved through him like lightning, subtle but undeniable. Around them, conversation continued. Laughter rose and fell, but the air near the head of the table grew heavy. Guests leaned forward unconsciously, sensing something amiss, though they had not heard what passed between them. The maid stepped back smoothly, her face composed, her eyes downcast as though she had said nothing at all. Her tray shifted slightly, catching the light, and for a moment she was once again invisible, but not to him. The billionaire's mind raced. The toast he had just given, the compliments he had lavished on his wife, the years of carefully built reputation, all of it trembled under the weight of those whispered words. He turned his head slowly, forcing his face back into its mask of composure, but inside he could feel his heart pounding against his ribs. He dared not look at his wife just yet, not while the crowd was still watching. Across the table, the wife's laughter rang out, bright and melodic, too perfect. She leaned toward another guest, her diamond earrings swinging with every practiced gesture. To everyone else, she was the picture of elegance. To him, suddenly, she was something else, a question, a shadow, a secret now illuminated. The room, though loud, seemed to narrow into silence around him. His eyes flickered to the maid for only an instant, catching the steady calm in her posture, the faint tremor of courage still glowing in her expression. She had said enough. She had handed him the truth like a blade, and now it was in his hands to decide whether to sheath it or let it strike. His chest tightened as he forced a smile back onto his face, raising his glass once more as though nothing had happened. The crowd followed, oblivious, but a new current ran beneath the polished surface of the evening. The maid's whisper had shifted the ground under his feet. And though no one else yet knew it, the night would never be the same. The glass slipped in his grip, the faintest clink against the polished marble floor, louder than any shout could have been. Every guest in the hall felt it, the sudden tremor in the air, the pause that caught in their throats, the ripple of unease that spread faster than words ever could. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Laughter cut short. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Silence rolled outward like a tide swallowing the room whole. The billionaire stood rooted in place, his hand trembling slightly as he fought to steady the glass. His face, usually composed and immovable, cracked with something raw. His wife, still seated in her glittering gown, kept her practiced smile, but it faltered at the edges, the corners of her lips twitching as if betraying the storm beneath. Eyes turned toward her, then back to him, then toward the maid, the invisible figure who had dared step into the light of truth. The maid did not move. Her tray was empty now, her role fulfilled, but she stood tall, even as her heart hammered in her chest. She had spoken the words that no one else dared. Whether they would save her or destroy her, she did not know, but she would not retreat. She had lifted a veil, and in doing so, she had altered the weight of the room forever. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging quick, nervous glances. No one asked what had been said, but everyone knew something had cracked. The billionaire's silence spoke louder than an outburst, his frozen stillness more damning than rage. For years, he had been the unshakable center of every gathering, the man whose confidence never bent. Now, before them all, he stood undone by a whisper. His wife's hand moved to adjust a necklace, her composure slipping as her eyes flicked to her husband. The mask of charm she wore so easily no longer held. She could feel the stares, the weight of suspicion creeping like smoke into the corners of the hall. Her beauty, her practiced grace, could not shield her from the question hanging unspoken in every guest's mind. What had she lied about? The billionaire's lips parted, but no words came. His throat tightened, his chest heaved once, and then he lowered the glass slowly to the table. In that stillness, something irreversible passed between him and the maid. Her truth had bound them together in a moment that neither could erase. She stepped back, her duty done, her fate uncertain. And yet, as the silence thickened, it was not she who seemed small. It was the man at the head of the table, the woman beside him, and the guests who had always played their part in the performance of power. For the first time, they saw the maid not as background, but as the axis upon which the night had turned. The frozen silence held, stretching into eternity, before the music resumed faintly in the background, hollow against the weight that lingered. Nothing had been explained, but everything had been revealed. The balance of power had shifted, and the night would be remembered not for wealth or grandeur, but for the words that stopped a billionaire in his tracks.